Kia ora, I'm Erica Wilkinson, New Zealand's Acting Threatened Species Ambassador, and this is the Doc Sounds of Science podcast. Every episode, we talk about work being done behind the scenes by Doc's technical experts, scientists, rangers, and the experts in between. Kia ora, ko Erica Wilkinson tēnei. He kona I purangi tēnei e pā ana ki ngā Sounds of Science. Today we're talking to renowned shark expert, Clinton Duffy. Hi there, Clinton.
Kia ora, Erica. Ko Clinton Duffy aho. I am a technical advisor marine species for the Department of Conservation based in Auckland.
Thank you so much for talking to us. Now, Clinton, we've never met in person, but I've called you a lot for expertise on various marine species because you've got years of experience in the marine environment. Clinton is the person that you go to for anything on chondrichthyan fishes, so sharks, rays, chimeras, and he's got years of experience in marine ecology, habitat surveying, new species identification, and designing protected areas. He's even got his own Wikipedia page, which I'm not sure if he keeps updated, but clearly a fan does. He's been all around Aotearoa doing this work, right up to the Kermadex, right down to Rakiura. Now he's in beautiful Tamaki Makaurau, where he's calling us from. It's great to have you here.
Kia ora, Erica.
So, Clinton, tell me up front, what is your job?
Well, my job is primarily providing advice on protected fishes and turtles. Occasionally I get to do some research, some hands-on research on sharks and rays.
I bet that's the coolest job at any party that you're at. How did you get to where you are?
I grew up in Masterton in the Wairarapa, and we spent our Christmas holidays and virtually every school holidays at the beach. And when I was a very small boy, I saw people catching sharks off the beach, and I'd go up there and say, "Oh, that's a shark," and then I'd be told, "Oh no, we don't get sharks in New Zealand. That's a lemon fish." And then one day I was out in the boat with my father. We had a big bronze whaler swim past the boat, and I was pretty much hooked on them ever since. So I grew up watching Jacques Cousteau and Ron Valerie Taylor and Ben Crop TV shows, and waiting for the day that I could finally see a live one myself.
Oh, what a first experience with the bronze whaler. So tell me about New Zealand. Do we have sharks here?
Oh, we certainly do, and some of them are actually called lemonfish. But we have about 113 sharks and rays, depending on what the taxonomists say at any given point. Can't always make up our minds what to call them, and about half of those, around 66 species, are sharks.
And do we see them often?
It depends where you are, but yes, they're more commonly seen during spring and summer when some species move close to shore. Various species of sharks can be seen around the New Zealand coastline at almost any time of the year. Okay,
and are they threatened?
Some are. New Zealand's shark populations are managed, probably better than many in the world. That was a result of a recent IUCN Red List assessment that we did, and we came out looking reasonably good. But we've got a couple that are possibly near threatened, and a couple, the great white shark and the basking shark, that actually fall into threatened categories. Both of those, the great white shark in particular, falls into endangered because it's got a naturally very small population size.
I see. So I mean, now that we're there, can we please talk about the magnificent, mysterious, misunderstood, maybe, Carcharodon carcharias?
Right, yes. Well, I mean, an impressive fish by any stretch. You see hard-bitten fishermen that don't get excited about anything getting pretty excited when they have a great white shark swim past the boat, even a small one. We estimate there's about 750 adults in the New Zealand population, and that's shared between New Zealand and the east coast of Australia. The western Australian population is different and quite isolated from the New Zealand east coast population. They're born at around about 1 metre to 1.5 metres long. They weigh about 20 kilos at birth, and the females can get up to at least 7 metres long and well over 2.5 tonnes fully grown.
Amazing. And you've been doing data on them since 1990. What kind of thing is that telling you?
Well, first thing, it it told me was that they found all around New Zealand. It's a bit of a myth that they're the most common in the southern South Island and at Stewart Island, places like that. You can encounter great white sharks almost anywhere within the New Zealand waters. You tend to get smaller ones around the upper North Island and bigger ones further south, but you can occasionally get tiny great white sharks, turning up in the subantarctics as well as the big, really big ones.
Cool. And you get to dissect one or two a year, but do you often see them, do you get out in the field and see them alive?
I worked on them for 10 years in the field, and we generally got out in February, March, visited places like the Stewart Island and the Chatham Islands, the east coast off Gisborne, Manukau, Kaipara Harbours, places like that, and we saw them fairly regularly. I've probably seen several hundred of them now.
And there are so many photo credits online, Clinton Duffy, and it's this close-up of a great white. How do you get those photos? Is that a GoPro in the water, or are you in there? We
started out working out of the cages at Chatham Islands, and it was really quite impractical. We learnt fairly soon that we could recognise all the individuals, every individual that came to the boat by their colour patterns. We initially thought we'd film them from the cages, and that'd be a great way to do it, but it wasn't, because you can't see them coming up behind the cage or whatnot. So we swapped to pole cameras from the boat. So we'd stand on the duckboard at the back of the boat. We'd have a person on each side of the boat telling us where the sharks were, and that way we could pretty much photo identify any shark that came to the boat that day, provided we could get them close enough. And that's often the trick.
Wow. Identify any as in the ones that you'd tagged, or which species it was?
Oh, no, identify which individual great white shark it was. So Ella or Miranda or Fred or,
Fred the great white shark. That's amazing.
Well, there's too many sharks called Bruce.
And they've been protected since 2007. Have you seen a noticeable difference since then, since you've been doing that research?
Not really. We did a genetic mark recapture population estimate with scientists from CSIRO back in 2017, 2018, and that suggested the population's been pretty much stable for the previous decade, maybe in slight decline. So, we don't actually have any evidence of an increase in the number of sharks, and the numbers that we saw at Stewart Island were fairly consistent most years.
Okay. And you're doing basking shark research?
Well, yes. The basking sharks was in the southern hemisphere, sort of the holy grail at the moment, really. New Zealand was the southern hemisphere hotspot for basking sharks, and they're a real mystery. We know virtually nothing about them, and the best way to study them would be to satellite tag them. But of course, as soon as we got funding to do that, they disappeared. So they used
really
to
inconsiderate.
Very, very. They used to aggregate in places like the Pegasus Bay and the South Canterbury Bight. They were seen off Northern Stewart Island and Otago fairly regularly up until about the mid-2000s, and then they just suddenly disappeared. And we don't really know why that is. They have a reputation for doing this in the Northern Hemisphere. So, for example, around the British Isles, they disappeared from many of their hotspots for 20, 30 years and then suddenly just reappeared. So we don't really know why that happens. Satellite tagging in the Northern Hemisphere has shown that they're capable of crossing the equator, and they do that by swimming really deep below the warm tropical water and popping up on the other side. So it's possible the population shifts around the globe, but we just don't know.
Do you have any guesses as to what it is? Is it the temperature of the water or anything, or nothing's quite?
We don't have any guesses, really. It's all speculation. We know that climate change could affect the distribution of plankton, which they feed on. Mm-hmm. And so they feed on tiny crustaceans in the plankton, and they'll be very sensitive to changes in the distribution of currents and water temperatures and things like that. So that could be affecting them. They may have just sort of moved off somewhere else. We know they also occur in Chile. They are occasionally seen in South Australia. but it's possible they've gone to the northern hemisphere. It's possible they've shifted to the North Pacific or maybe the Atlantic.
Oh, wow. And do they have natural predators? Do basking sharks, and all sharks actually, do they have natural predators?
Well, the only evidence we have of natural predation on basking sharks is sort of they occasionally turn up in the stomach contents of great white sharks. I should say bits of them turn up. Obviously, it's a bit of too big a meal for a great white to eat the whole thing. Killer whales are probably predators of them, and that goes for great white sharks as well. Killer whales actually feed on quite a number of different species of shark.
So a great white's not an apex predator?
They're close to the top of the food chain, but yeah, I think killer whales really sit at the very top.
And let's talk about the unnatural predators that sharks have.
Oh, the unnatural predators that sharks have. Well, the biggest one, obviously, are human beings. It's been estimated that more than 100 million sharks are caught annually in commercial and sort of artisanal fisheries globally. That figures are quite out of date these days, and no one's come up with a better one yet. But it's certainly in the tens of millions of sharks that get caught by humans every year. And wherever you look, humans are the major pressure on sharks. And that it's not just fishing. It's in many countries. It's also habitat loss in the tropics. There are quite a number of freshwater sharks and rays.
Right. And in New Zealand, has the Maui and Hector threat management plan helped, or do you think it will help that expansion?
Although those plans aren't really intended to protect sharks, the restrictions on set netting in particular, and also potentially trawling in some of them, within some of the areas are close to trawling within 2 nautical miles of the coast. All of those sorts of measures certainly do help sharks, and great whites and basking sharks would be the two of the species that would probably benefit the most.
Can we talk about shark reproduction? I understand it's extremely varied and sometimes not so kind. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I mean, sharks have experimented with virtually every form of reproduction that is known to the vertebrate animals. One of the simplest forms of shark reproduction involves egg laying, and that's a relatively small number of sharks lay eggs. Most of the skates lay eggs, but the stingrays and majority of sharks give birth to live young. And it's not just one form of reproduction there. It starts off with things like dogfishes, which retain the eggs inside the female, and the eggs actually hatch inside the female, and then the young live off the yolk sac, to other ones where they hatch out inside the uterus. The mother produces, a material called uterine milk, which the embryo drinks. And then in extreme cases, the females produce eggs, which the developing embryos eat throughout their development. And at the very, very far end of that extreme, the 2 largest embryos in the uterus eat all the siblings. So that in those species, and it's a fairly small number, it's really mainly the grey nurse shark and the deep water nurse shark, female only gives birth to a maximum of 2 young at a time, because female sharks have 2 uteri, so 1 on each side of the body. And then you move up the ladder to things like the whaler sharks. They have a placenta, so the developing embryo has a placenta just like a mammalian one. It's derived from different tissues, but it's very, very similar to a mammalian placenta.
Amazing. And is it true that in great whites they need to swim away from the mother as soon as they come out?
So it's thought in most species of sharks, the females stop feeding while they're giving birth, so they don't inadvertently eat their young. Females tend to return to the area that they were born in to give birth, and then they leave those areas as well. So those areas may become sort of habitually used nursery areas. Some sharks actually breed over a very large area, but many use these habitual nursery areas that they return to every 2 or 3 years to give birth, and then they leave them, and that provides an extra layer of protection for the developing young, so you don't have large adult sharks mooching around that may eat you.
Always a good thing to have when you're being born. So you're the go-to when we see sharks. Your phone is one of the first to ring. I have to ask, do you have a shark phone?
No, I just have a standard dock phone.
That's fine. And you get loads of questions over the summer. The main one people always ask is, are there more sharks than usual this season? Is that right?
Yeah. Well, globally, it's pretty much true to say that there are less sharks than usual every year because sharks are so heavily fished and they're in danger. Many species are endangered throughout the world. In New Zealand, most of our shark fisheries seem to be doing fairly well, and the populations are considered to be stable. Very few are considered to be increasing. So pretty much every year we see the same number of sharks inshore that we saw the previous year. The exception can be in exceptionally warm years when we may get a few extra tropical visitors. Some of the rarer tropical vagrant species like oceanic white tips and tiger sharks and dusky sharks and things like that. We may see 1 or 2 of those, but overall numbers are generally pretty stable between years. You can get some parts of the population shifting into areas where there's a bit more food than usual, so you can get these local shifts in abundance, but overall pretty much the same number of sharks every year.
Okay, so you see Fred going past, Fred the great white shark.
Oh, you wouldn't miss him. He's pretty big. Yeah.
Cool. It sounds like there are so many to choose from. Do you have a best day at work ever that you keep going back to?
Oh, I think my best day in the office was last summer, actually north of Hauturu, Little Barrier, and it was late in the afternoon. Almost all the other boats on the water had left. The sea had become glassy calm, and we were out looking for manta rays. And not many people know that we have manta rays in New Zealand, but oceanic manta rays visit here every year and probably resident for a large part of the year. And we'd seen a few that day, and then just before we left, we noticed a little bit of a disturbance on the surface and some birds circling, and we went over, and a very large manta ray sort of broke the surface right in front of the boat. And then while we just sat there in the boat with the motor off, we looked around. There were manta rays breaking the surface everywhere as far as we could see. And it's one of those moments you got to sort of blink your eyes and slap yourself and go, am I actually in New Zealand?
Oh, that is so cool. Cause
it was pretty cool, yeah.
Wow, because it hasn't been known for a long time, has it, about manta rays aggregating that?
Well, mana whenua have known about manta rays for a long, long time. And one of the names for Hauturu actually means manta ray. So they've clearly been coming to New Zealand for thousands, probably millions of years. In fact, they're probably better considered to be resident in New Zealand and just visit other places.
Okay.
And that's one of the questions we're trying to get at with the manta rays. We're trying to figure out, is it a resident New Zealand population? It seems to be, but starting to look now. We've heard that the first manta rays have been sighted again this summer, and we'll be working with Conservation International and the New Zealand Manta Trust to try and get more photo identifications of the animals and possibly get a few tags out on them as well.
Awesome. So, your work stories don't often involve the printer breaking, I can imagine, but you must have some pretty unexpected, what others would say are odd days at work. Can you think of any that stand out there?
I once had a stingray try to have a jacuzzi on top of my head when I was scuba diving at the Poor Knights.
Of course you did.
All the lights went out. It got very dark, and when I looked up, there was a big stingray just sitting pretty much draped over the bubbles from my the first stage of my scuba. So I was having a lovely time. I actually had to look up and poke it in the belly to get it to move off a bit. Yeah.
Wow. And I feel like there's a black groper story.
Oh, yes. That was at the Kermadex. Back in, I think it was 2004, I was up there on my first trip to the Kermadex and swimming along, enjoying the and joined the grouper, and we had a couple of small Galapagos sharks following us around. And we came around the corner, and here's this big black spotted black groper. And I say black because they can be very pale as well, and they can change their colour in an instant. This guy was particularly black. He was all black and looking fairly grumpy on it. And I was all black. I had a black wetsuit, a black tank, and black fins, and he came straight up to me and right up to my face and started flaring out his pectoral fins and opening his mouth and raising his dorsal fin. And I thought, he's being friendly, and then he would zip behind me and then pop back around in front of me and zip behind me and pop back front. And then in the end, he really flared out his mouth and gill covers. And I thought, I know what you're doing. You're threatening me. You're telling me to get out of your territory. And I took the hint and moved on. But it wasn't until after the dive that I was told that he was actually zipping behind me and biting my fins, trying to move me off in a bit more of a hurry. I should have gone white and been, and submissive, but I couldn't change colour like he did.
No, gotta go fashion conscious in the water like that. I didn't know they could change colour at will. Can they just go any colour?
They change from this jet black coloration to this black and white coloration, where they've got very prominent oblique white lines along the side of the body, and at times they can go almost pure white.
Wow.
And it happens in the blink of an eye as you look at them.
So much camouflage in the water, because great whites are double camouflage as well, aren't they? That double. Tell me about that.
Most sharks and most pelagic fish are countershaded, so they're dark on the top and pale on the belly. And that's a form of camouflage where the pale belly reflects about the same amount of light as the upper part of the body. So the animals only have to be a short distance away from you, and they just blend, merge into the background and become incredibly difficult to see.
Amazing. There are so many variables in conservation work. Have you had times in the field where everything's gone wrong?
Oh, yeah. Sharks. As soon as you
don't do what you want.
No, as soon as you decide you want to study them, they disappear and become incredibly difficult to find all of a sudden. The basking sharks are the worst example of that for me. I mean, the entire population disappeared in the mid-2000s as soon as we got some funding to work on them. But embarrassing to lose a 12.2 metre long fish. But yes, I mean, one year we went to the Chatham Islands, the year after a very successful first field season at the Chatham Islands, where we had sharks lining up at the boat to be tagged and photo ID'd. We went back there the next year, and we spent 3 weeks there, and we only saw 2 or 3 sharks, and they wouldn't come anywhere near the boat.
Really?
We had a National Geographic film crew there, absolutely going spare and looking at us as if we didn't know what we were talking about.
Oh, no. And they're just not reliable.
They're just not reliable. And we found out in the end that people had been catching them in the lead up to their protection taking effect. And they'd become incredibly wary of boats. And, the few sharks that we saw approached the boats underwater, and then they would roll over on their side and look at the boat and go, no, we're not sticking around here.
Oh, so clever. Such clever techniques. So if people aren't dicks, then we might get to see more marine species.
Well, during the lockdown, people have got lots and lots of stories of all sorts of marine life, including sharks and rays, coming much closer to the beaches and hanging out more in shallow water. Also aware of some research that was done at University of Auckland, where they found that eagle rays, for example, were much more abundant or tended to be more abundant in the quieter harbours than the harbours that had boat ramps and marinas and were regularly used by powered vessels. And it's just simply the level of disturbance drives quite a lot of these species away from the shore.
It seems so obvious when you say it like that. Has your attitude to sharks changed since you began working with them, or have you just loved them forever?
Yeah, I pretty much loved them forever. It's as long as I can think. I certainly had a real a real healthy respect for them from an early age, because all you ever came across were shark attack stories. And so I started spearfishing when I was about 12 years old, and the first thing I wanted to do was learn more about great white sharks to avoid becoming a statistic. And, I found that the more you find out about the sharks, the less of a monster, the less mystifying they are. They're absolutely beautiful animals. Great to see underwater, and I go out of my way these days to find sharks underwater. Not necessarily great whites. I still have a very, very healthy respect for them, but I know that not every great white is going to bite you on sight. One of the things we noticed working on them was they're a very circumspect animal. The large great whites are pretty cautious creatures around boats, and they've all got seem to have an individual personality, if you like. They all behave slightly differently, and some of them you can even recognise by their behaviours. So they're much more complex animals than most people give them credit for. Yeah, and there's and that's been borne out by research on brain size and behaviour and things like that.
Wow. And you're right that the word shark has such negative connotations, unfortunately. What do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about sharks?
Oh, that they all look like a great white. There's well over 400 species of sharks globally, and they range in size from things that are fully grown at about 10 or 12 centimetres long to whale sharks that are, get to 18 metres long. And the next one is that any shark you see is going to bite you. Most sharks have no interest in human beings. Most sharks are actually more scared of you than you are of them. As a general rule of thumb, if you don't know what sort of shark you're looking at, you should treat any shark over 1.8 metres long as being potentially dangerous. But even only potentially dangerous, just because any wild animal that size is a powerful animal, and if you harm it or do something to it, it could potentially hurt you.
Okay, and with the negative outlook, would you say the media don't really help? I read something the other day that said the Taranaki Terror, and I just thought that's not fair.
I was lucky enough to see the Taranaki Terror.
Did you rename it Bruce or Fred or something?
No, we called her Mrs. White. She was a very large great white shark, probably close to 6 metres long. I saw it breach one day off New Plymouth from about half a kilometre away, and she looked absolutely enormous. But it's true. The media likes to sensationalise sharks, and I think even though there are many more positive stories about sharks and shark conservation in the media these days, they still inevitably play up the sensational side of shark behaviour, shark-human interactions.
So I've heard before, Clinton, that sharks use their mouth as their main sensor and that their eyesight's not so good. Are they myths? Are they true?
Yeah, it's complete myth. All sharks have multiple very, very highly attuned senses. So most sharks have very good vision, very good eyesight. They're very good at they have very good nocturnal sight. They're very good at picking out silhouettes. They don't really see colour, but they do respond to highly contrasting objects and shiny objects. Obviously, those are things that will attract your attention. They have a very good sense of smell, of course. They're renowned for being bloodhounds of the oceans. They have a very sensitive lateral line system. So that's a system of canals or containing little sensory cells that runs along their body and around their head. And so they can detect vibrations in the water. They have a well-developed electrosense, and so all those jelly-filled pores you can see under the snout of a shark or a ray, they're extremely sensitive electroreceptors, and they're sensitive enough to detect the muscle, the nervous impulses that make muscles move. So like the muscles on a fish's gills or the heart beating, things like that. They have a number of sensory modalities that they can use when they're investigating an object. And one step is to bite it and see what it tastes like as well.
Mm-hmm. You've talked a bit about how sharks are intelligent. Can you tell me a bit more or give me an example there?
Well, some sharks are very intelligent for a fish, obviously. Others have fairly small brains, things like dogfishes and whatnot. They're probably very similar to a goldfish. But sharks at the other end of the evolutionary scale are fairly intelligent, and you see lots of examples of that if you spend time in the water with them. I sort of mentioned that great white sharks are pretty circumspect around boats, and they'll often check them out and spend a lot of time checking out a boat before taking a bait. They also learn. Most of the larger active pelagic sharks will learn very quickly. In fact, most fish are capable of learning very quickly. Many of the shark feeds that you see in the tropics, the ecotourism operations that operate shark feeds for divers they started off just by people noticing that every time they went out to dump the organic waste from a hotel or offal from a fish processing factory, the sharks were already there waiting for them. And it's pretty obvious that these fish feeds or these shark feeds, the sharks know the time of the day and the day of the week that it's going to happen on, and they're already there waiting. And if you think about how a predator survives, if you can't find food, if you can't remember to where to find food and the time of the year to find it, you're not going to be very good as a predator. So, sharks are capable of learning, and I've even read suggestions that they're capable of social learning. So they're able to see something happen to another shark and go, I'm not going to do that, or that shark got a feed, and so it's obviously a safe place to feed.
Okay. What's your favourite nature fact? Do you have one?
Favourite nature fact? There's several species of sharks that live in northern Australia and Indonesia that walk, and they're capable of climbing out of a rock pool and walking on using their fins as legs. So their pectoral fins and their pelvic fins are modified so they can move them backwards and forwards like legs, and they can climb up out of a rock pool and crawl across the reef to the next rock pool. They're called epaulet sharks, and beautiful little things, and it's really crazy seeing them walk around on the sea floor.
Have you seen it?
I've only seen them in aquariums, and I've seen footage of them doing that. But it is amazing to see a fish walking like that. They'll be on land before we know it.
That's right. I wonder why they're doing it. I guess for food, to follow the food.
Oh yeah, I mean these little things. They live in tiny cracks, and they're quite a cryptic animals. They live in the narrow cracks between coral and they've got long, slender bodies, and these fins adapted for walking and crawling through these narrow spaces where they wouldn't necessarily be able to swim. And at low tide, they can get trapped in pools. So it's it makes sense for them to be able to get out of water. They essentially get out of the pool, hold their breath, they hold a mouthful of water, and then crawl across to the next pool.
I'd love to see that. That's now a great white shark, and that is on my bucket list. You've been in conservation a long time. Can you tell me about a game-changing research discovery that you've been a part of? I guess
the biggest one I've been involved in has been the satellite tagging work that I've been involved in with Malcolm Francis from NIWA and Ramon Bonfil from the Wildlife Conservation Society. And we started tagging great white sharks in New Zealand for the first time. And we had some fairly, what we thought were fairly well-based expectations on what we'd see for those animals. We expected to see quite a bit of movement between the aggregation sites at Stewart Island and the Chatham Islands and mainland New Zealand. We expected to see sharks going to Australia, that sort of thing. What we found was quite different. The sharks do go to Australia, but often they go to Australia via the other islands in the Southwest Pacific, islands like Tonga, Fiji, Niue, New Caledonia, and they clearly knew where they were going. They were very directed movements. They swam in straight lines, and they swam at the surface for prolonged periods of time, often covering more than 100 kilometres a day on these trips. So it was only taking them, 22 to 25 days to do about 3,000 kilometres. And then they would spend, 5 to 6 months away from New Zealand up there, and then they would start returning. Some of them often came back exactly the same way they left, and others would come down the east coast of Australia and then back to New Zealand that way. It's completely changed our understanding of how they behave in New Zealand. And the other real standout is we saw no movement, and we still have seen no movement between the Chatham Islands aggregation site and the Stewart Islands aggregation site. So there's more movement. There's quite a lot of movement between the Chatham Islands and northeast North Island, and white sharks from the Chathams passing by there quite regularly, often a long way offshore. But, as yet, we haven't seen any direct exchange between sites within New Zealand. So that's a real mystery.
Do you have anything that you think of as a real proud moment of conservation achievement?
Well, I've been involved in the protection of a number of species, and seeing manta rays protected and species like giant groper and deep water nest shark protected, they were really proud moments. And it's also hard to go past the work that we've done on white sharks, they've gone from being one of probably the poorest known species of shark in New Zealand waters to one of the best known species, one of the ones we know the most about. But another moment that stands out is I was lucky enough to work with Peter Last and redescribing the northern spiny dogfish, this innocuous little fish. It was thought to be part of a globally distributed species, and we looked at it as part of the New Zealand Threat Classification System, and we dug into its taxonomy, and we're able to recognise it's a unique species. It's an endemic species. We were able to redescribe it and give it back its original scientific name, and so it's a real New Zealand shark. We have a number of endemic species of sharks. Most of the shark you get in your fish and chips is the endemic rig or spotted dogfish. But it was really nice to give a fish its name back.
Boycott fish and chip shops. Is that what we're supposed? Is that what we can do?
No, I'm not. I've never boycott fish and chips. As long as they're sustainably harvested, there's no threat to the species.
What do people need to know when they're out swimming this summer?
They should be aware that there's potentially sharks visiting or hanging out at the beach that they're going to. It's very common to see bronze whalers, for example, and baby hammerhead sharks just offshore, especially along the northeast North Island. The thing you need to bear in the back of your mind that those species present virtually no risk to people at all. They're there to feed on fish, and during the daytime they're just generally hanging out. They're not that interested in feeding. Bronze waders can get aggressive towards people, but that's generally spear fishermen. So when you've got blood and struggling fish in the water, that's a feeding stimulus for the bronze whalers, and they can behave very aggressively towards spear fishermen, try to drive them away from the fish that they've speared so they can steal them. So it's like, it's like a dog or something becoming very territorial about its food. We get the occasionally dangerous species like great whites and tiger sharks cruising along the beaches as well. So the general rule of thumb is if you don't know what you're looking at, if you don't know what species of shark it is, you just get out of the water as quickly and quietly as you can. Whereas I'd probably be running past you to get into the water to go swim with it. The sensible thing is if you don't know what you're looking at, if you don't know if it's a dangerous shark or a harmless species, just get out of the water.
Because it's an environment that we need to respect them. It's their territory, really, and we're kind of...
Yeah, sharks do live in the ocean. Yeah, as surprising as that may seem to a lot of people, that's their home. Yeah.
And how would you like to see our relationship with sharks progress in the next, say, 10 years?
Oh, well, it's really, really happy to say that since I first started studying sharks, human attitudes towards sharks have almost done a complete 360. They used to be vilified and persecuted and just killed for being a shark. I started sampling some fishing competitions in the mid 80s, around 1986. I was at a fishing competition where there were over 200 sharks killed over 3 days. Most of them didn't even make the minimum qualifying weight for the competition. They were just killed and pulled out as to be exhibited as another dead shark, and that's a good thing. That has completely changed in the last 30 or 40 years, and you will not see that at a fishing competition anywhere in New Zealand anymore. So people's attitudes have really changed. In fact, a lot of people think that all species of sharks are protected, and are really surprised to find out that only a handful actually have full protection. I guess from now on, I really like to see people start thinking about the effects they're having on sharks' habitat, the places that the sharks live. Coastal development and pollution affect the coastal shark habitats, particularly the nursery areas, quite badly. And we just need to start thinking about how we're affecting the ocean as a whole.
Absolutely. Clinton, thank you so much for coming on this. This was so interesting to learn about. I feel like we know a lot more about how to leave sharks be in the water. It should be really only you that goes towards them and you go and swim with them. We'll leave that to you this summer. I love how much we've learned about how intelligent they are, and I feel like we're going to learn lots more in the future. There's still so much to go. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
That's all for this episode. If you like what you heard, show us some love with a 5-star rating. The Doc Sounds of Science podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts, so subscribe now and never miss an episode.